I have lived long enough to understand that houses are not silent. They may not speak in words, but they hold memories the way skin holds scars. Every wall remembers laughter that once filled it, and every floor remembers the weight of feet that crossed it with gratitude or with disregard. That morning, before the sun had fully claimed the sky, the house felt alert, as though it sensed an old disturbance returning. I was standing near the window with my cup of tea, watching the street stretch awake slowly, when the sound reached me. The low, dragging roll of suitcase wheels across the floor. It cut through the quiet like something out of place, and my heart responded before my mind did. Peace recognizes intrusion immediately. The door had opened without a knock. That detail mattered more than anything else. Doors teach people how to enter a space, and the way someone opens one tells you what they believe they deserve. She walked in with certainty, not hesitation. My daughter-in-law stood there with her shoulders squared, sunglasses still covering her eyes, hair styled as if she were stepping into a public place rather than a private home. Behind her, a driver carried in more bags, placing them just inside the entrance before leaving without acknowledgement. When the door closed, the house seemed to inhale sharply, as though bracing itself. She did not look at me first. She looked at the walls, the furniture, the ceiling fan that turned with its familiar hum. Her eyes moved slowly, measuring, judging, comparing what she saw to what she remembered, and perhaps to what she felt entitled to. I noticed how she lingered on certain details: the older sofa, the framed photographs, the faint crack near the corner of the ceiling that I had never bothered to repair. These things had never embarrassed me. They told the truth of a life lived fully, not decorated for display. I set my cup down carefully on the table. I have learned that when something matters, you move slowly. Quick movements belong to anger, and anger clouds clarity. I asked her a question, gently, calmly, as one might ask a guest if they would like some water. I asked her if she had asked the owner of the house for permission before bringing her suitcases inside. The words were simple. They carried no accusation, no bitterness. They simply stated a boundary that had always existed, even when others pretended not to see it. For a moment, she did not respond. That pause told me more than any answer could have. People who are accustomed to compliance are always unsettled by calm resistance. She laughed then, a short sound meant to dissolve my question into something insignificant. She said she was family. She said family does not need permission. She said this was her home, too. The confidence with which she said it suggested she had rehearsed these words, perhaps during the drive over, perhaps long before. I listened without interrupting. Silence has a way of exposing arrogance because it gives it room to echo. When she finished, I nodded once and repeated the question. This time I spoke more slowly, not louder, as if volume might be mistaken for authority. I asked her again whether she had asked the owner of the house. Her smile faded. She removed her sunglasses, and her eyes finally met mine. I saw irritation there, and beneath it something else she did not want to reveal. Uncertainty has a way of hiding behind annoyance. She accused me of being dramatic. She reminded me that my son was her husband, as though his name alone granted her ownership of everything associated with him. She said she had nowhere else to go. She said I should understand. The word understand was heavy with expectation. It did not mean empathy, it meant surrender. What she did not know was that I had already spoken to my son the night before. He had called me late, his voice low, worn down by months of tension that never found release. He did not accuse her, he did not defend himself. He spoke like someone who had reached the end of an argument and discovered there was nothing left to win. He told me she had left their apartment weeks earlier without explanation. He told me silence had replaced conversation, and pride had replaced patience. He did not ask me to fix anything. He simply needed someone to hear him without judgment. I asked her to sit down. She hesitated, then lowered herself into the chair, placing her phone face down on the table, as if preparing for confrontation. The suitcases stood nearby, solid and undeniable. They represented assumptions she had not questioned. I told her that this house had always welcomed those who entered it with humility. I told her that walls remember intentions and floors remember footsteps. She shifted in her seat, impatience visible in the tightening of her jaw. Youth often mistakes restraint for weakness, and I knew she believed my calm was a sign she could push further. She reminded me of the early years of their marriage, of the times she had stayed here, cooked meals, smiled through gatherings she did not enjoy. She spoke of sacrifices she believed went unnoticed. I did not deny her experiences. Every person carries their own version of truth, shaped by what they choose to see. But I told her that effort without respect slowly becomes resentment, and resentment, when left unattended, hardens into entitlement. Entitlement convinces people that doors should open simply because they arrive. I asked her where she planned to go after this. The question unsettled her. She looked away, then back at me, then down at her hands. Silence answered me before she did. She had not planned beyond the assumption that this door would open without question. Assumption is a dangerous thing. It replaces communication and calls it confidence. I told her she could stay one night only, not because she demanded it, but because compassion does not require the erasure of boundaries. Compassion can exist alongside firmness. She protested, accused me of being cold, of choosing rules over people. I did not argue. Time has taught me that explanations given to those unwilling to listen only exhaust the speaker. That night, the house did not sleep easily. I heard her pacing in the guest room, the soft rhythm of someone wrestling with thoughts they did not want to face. The walls carried her voice as she spoke on the phone, complaining about my stubbornness, my outdated values, my refusal to bend. I lay there in bed, listening without anger. I had been misunderstood many times before. It loses its sting when you know your intentions are honest. As I lay there, memories returned uninvited, as they often do in the quiet. I remembered when she first came into our lives, young and bright-eyed, full of opinions and ambition. She had spoken quickly then, laughed loudly, filled every silence with words. I had watched her carefully, not critically, but attentively. A mother learns to observe, not to judge. In those early days, I had hoped time would soften her edges, that marriage would teach her patience the way it teaches everyone else eventually. I remembered the first time she looked around this house with thinly veiled discomfort, the way her eyes lingered on the older furniture, the modest decor. I remembered how she suggested renovations that would make the place more modern, as if age was something to be erased rather than respected. I smiled then, said nothing. Not every comment deserves a response. Silence can be generous. When they moved out, it was her decision more than his. She wanted independence, freedom from what she called old rules. I understood the desire to build one's own life. I did not protest. I told myself that distance might bring appreciation. Sometimes absence teaches what presence could not. In the morning, I woke early, as I always do. Habit is a form of grounding. I made breakfast quietly, moving through the kitchen with familiarity born of decades. The smell of tea and toast filled the space, comforting in its constancy. She entered slowly, her confidence dulled, her eyes shadowed by lack of sleep. She did not apologize. Pride does not dissolve overnight. But she asked if she could talk. That request alone told me something had shifted. She spoke about feeling invisible in her marriage, about conversations that turned into competitions, about always feeling the need to assert herself to avoid being overlooked. She spoke of fear, though she did not name it as such. Fear of losing control, fear of being insignificant. I listened carefully. Fear often disguises itself as arrogance. People who feel powerless try to dominate what they believe will submit. I told her something my own mother once told me when I was newly married and stubborn enough to believe love was proven through victory. I told her that control is an illusion, and marriage is about standing beside one another, even when pride wants to pull you apart. I told my daughter-in-law that running away without accountability closes doors you may one day need open again. She cried then, quietly, the way people cry when they are too tired to perform. Real tears fell, not for sympathy, but because holding everything together became exhausting. She asked me if I hated her. The question surprised me with its vulnerability. I told her no. Hate requires energy I no longer waste. I told her that respect, once broken, takes time to rebuild, and time demands patience from everyone involved. She stayed for 3 days, 3 days that felt longer than they were.
Days filled with careful silences and small gestures. She helped in the kitchen without being asked. She spoke less, listened more. I watched without comment. Change does not need applause. On the 4th day, she packed her suitcases again. This time, she did not assume anything. She placed them by the door and came to me first. She asked before leaving. The question was small, but it mattered. She thanked me, not warmly, but sincerely. Sincerity is often quiet. When she left, the house felt lighter, as though a tension it had been holding loosened its grip. Weeks passed. Life resumed its ordinary rhythm. Then my son visited alone. He looked different, as though something heavy had shifted inside him. He told me they were trying again, slowly, with honesty and boundaries. He thanked me for not throwing her out, and also for not bowing to her. Balance, I told him, is the hardest lesson family teaches. That evening, I stood by the window once more, watching the street move forward as it always does, indifferent to our personal dramas. The house felt calm. It had witnessed something important, a reminder that dignity does not shout and respect cannot be assumed. Sometimes all it takes is a calm question asked at the right moment to remind someone that not every door opens simply because you arrive. The days after she left did not rush past me. Time slowed, as it often does when a house has just exhaled after holding something heavy inside. I moved through the rooms with awareness, noticing how certain corners felt quieter than before, how the guest room carried a faint tension that had not yet fully dissolved. Houses, like people, take time to settle after conflict. I opened windows, let air move through spaces that had been closed, not just physically, but emotionally. Fresh air has a way of reminding walls that nothing stays forever, not even discomfort. I found myself thinking about the first year of my son's marriage more often than I expected, not with regret, but with clarity. When they had first brought their belongings into this house years ago, the suitcases had been lighter. There was laughter then, impatience mixed with excitement, mistakes softened by hope. I remembered watching her walk through these same rooms back then, touching surfaces curiously, asking questions, making suggestions with enthusiasm rather than judgment. Somewhere along the way, curiosity had turned into criticism and enthusiasm into expectation. I had noticed the shift gradually, the way one notices weather changing not in a single moment, but across many days. The comments that began as harmless observations grew sharper, the suggestions became instructions, the patience wore thin. I had chosen silence more often than not because I was afraid to speak, but because I believed experience would teach what words could not. Silence, however, is often misunderstood. It can be mistaken for agreement, or worse, permission. There were moments I replayed in my mind, moments I had dismissed too quickly. The time she rearranged the living room without asking, explaining later that she thought it would make more sense. The time she replaced my old cooking utensils with newer ones, telling me kindly that these were more efficient. Efficiency, I learned, is often valued over sentiment by those who have not yet built a lifetime of memories. I had thanked her, even smiled. I had told myself these were small things. But small things, when repeated, teach people where they believe they stand. When they moved out, she had framed it as independence, growth, progress. I had agreed outwardly, even helped pack, but inwardly I sensed relief mixed with sadness. Relief that the quiet of the house would return to its natural rhythm, sadness that distance had become necessary for peace. I remember standing at the door as they left, watching the car disappear down the street, telling myself that space would soften sharp edges. I had hoped absence would bring appreciation. Sometimes it does, sometimes it only strengthens pride. As days passed after her recent departure, I received small updates through my son. Short messages, cautious optimism. He spoke of conversations that were difficult but honest, of silences that no longer felt hostile but thoughtful. I listened without inserting myself. There is a point where guidance must step back and allow experience to finish its work. Parents who interfere too much rob their children of growth. Parents who withdraw entirely leave them without anchor. Balance, again, revealed itself as the hardest lesson. I noticed changes in myself, too. Standing my ground had not hardened me as I once feared it might. Instead, it clarified something I had long ignored. Respect does not require explanation, it requires consistency. When you explain yourself too often, you teach people that your boundaries are negotiable. That realization did not come with bitterness, but with calm acceptance. Growth at my age is quiet, it does not announce itself. One afternoon, as I dusted the shelves, I came across an old photograph tucked behind a frame. It was of my husband and me, younger, standing in front of this same house when it was newly built. The walls were cleaner then, the paint brighter. Our smiles were tired but proud. I remembered the sacrifices that had gone into creating this space, the nights we slept on the floor before furniture arrived, the years we postponed comforts so stability could come first. Houses like this are not inherited easily, they are earned slowly. That photograph stayed with me. It reminded me that ownership is not about whose name is on paper, but whose life is woven into the walls. Perhaps that was what my daughter-in-law had not yet understood. Perhaps that was what she had begun to glimpse during her short stay. Understanding does not arrive at once. It arrives in fragments, often when pride has been exhausted. A few weeks later, she returned briefly, not with suitcases this time, with empty hands. She stood at the door and waited. I noticed that immediately. Waiting is a powerful gesture. It says, I recognize this is not mine to enter freely. I opened the door and she greeted me quietly. Her posture was different, less rigid, less defensive. She did not step inside until I moved aside. We spoke little that day. She told me they were attending counseling. She did not present it as an achievement, but as a necessity. That honesty mattered. She asked if she could help with anything. I asked her to sit with me instead. We drank tea. Silence filled the space comfortably this time. Comfortable silence is earned. As she prepared to leave, she paused and looked around the house again. This time her gaze lingered differently. She noticed the framed photographs, the worn edges of furniture, the crack in the ceiling. She did not comment. She did not judge. Observation without commentary is another form of respect. After she left, I realized something subtle but important. My question that first morning had not been about suitcases. It had been about acknowledgement, about recognizing that relationships, like houses, require permission to re-enter once trust has been disrupted. That lesson applied to all of us, not just her. I thought about how often people confuse familiarity with entitlement, how easily shared history becomes justification for disregard. Families struggle not because they lack love, but because they fail to maintain respect once love feels guaranteed. Love without respect becomes obligation. Respect restores balance. The house settled further in the days that followed. Sounds returned to their natural rhythm. The creak of the stairs felt friendly again. The kitchen hummed with familiarity. I realized the house had done what it always does. It had borne witness without judgment. It had allowed events to unfold and absorbed what needed absorbing. Houses don't choose sides. They simply remember. I found myself grateful, not for the conflict, but for the clarity it brought. Aging teaches you that peace is not the absence of tension, but the presence of boundaries honored. I no longer felt the need to justify my firmness. Justification invites debate. Boundaries invite respect. As months passed, visits became more relaxed. She and my son came together sometimes, sitting on the sofa, speaking carefully but honestly. Laughter returned slowly, cautiously, like something testing whether it was safe. I watched without comment. Growth does not require an audience. One evening, after they left, I stood by the window once more. The same street, the same houses, different light. Life moved forward as it always does, indifferent to our private dramas. I understood then that the house had not simply remembered who respected it. It had reminded me who I was allowed to become when I stopped confusing kindness with surrender. Some lessons arrive late in life, not because they are complex, but because they require courage we have spent years reserving for others. That morning with the suitcases had asked me a quiet question too. Would I finally honor my own boundaries, or would I continue to erase myself for peace that never truly arrived? I answered without raising my voice, and the house had remembered.
Time has a way of revealing whether lessons have taken root or merely brushed the surface. In the weeks that followed, I watched quietly, not with suspicion, but with awareness. Awareness is different. Suspicion looks for failure. Awareness looks for truth. When my son and daughter-in-law came together again, it was not with grand declarations or dramatic apologies. It was with careful steps, as though both were learning to walk on ground that had once cracked beneath them. I noticed how she waited now, how she asked before acting, how her voice no longer rushed ahead of her thoughts. These changes were small, but small changes are the only ones that last. There was a Sunday afternoon when they arrived unannounced, but not uninvited. That distinction mattered. The doorbell rang, and when I opened it, they stood there together, not crowding the entrance, not stepping in before being welcomed. She smiled softly, unsure, as though still learning what was allowed. I stepped aside, and only then did they enter. The house responded differently this time. The air felt lighter, less guarded. Respect alters atmosphere more than people realize. We sat in the living room, the same room that had once felt tense under her judgment. Conversation flowed carefully, like water testing new ground. My son spoke more than he used to. She listened more than she once had. Listening is an act of humility, though many mistake it for passivity. I watched her hands as she spoke, no longer sharp with gestures, but open, resting on her lap. Body language often reveals what words try to hide. At one point, she looked around the room and said quietly that the house felt different than she remembered. I asked her how. She paused before answering. She said it felt calmer. Not newer, not bigger, just calmer. That answer told me more than any apology could have. Calm does not come from control. It comes from acceptance. Later that evening, after they left, I sat alone and allowed myself to reflect more deeply than I had before. I thought about the years I had spent avoiding conflict in the name of harmony, how often I had smoothed over discomfort instead of addressing it. I realized that my silence had sometimes been wisdom, but sometimes it had been fear disguised as patience. Fear of being labeled difficult, fear of disrupting peace. But peace built on self-erasure is not peace at all. It is endurance. As women, especially mothers, we are often taught that endurance is virtue, that swallowing discomfort keeps families together. There is truth in that, but also danger. Endurance without boundaries teaches others that your comfort is optional. I had lived much of my life balancing on that thin line, and perhaps this situation had arrived not to test my daughter-in-law, but to test me. I remembered my own early marriage, the ways I had entered my mother-in-law's home with caution, the way I had asked before changing anything, the way I had held my tongue even when I disagreed. Not because I was weak, but because I understood I was stepping into a space built long before me. Respect did not make me smaller. It taught me patience. Patience taught me understanding. Understanding eventually gave me voice. Months passed, seasons changed. With each visit, I noticed subtle shifts. She no longer referred to the house as outdated. She asked about the photographs on the wall. She listened when I spoke of the past, of sacrifices made quietly. One afternoon, she asked me how we managed in the early years, when money was tight and expectations were heavy. The question was genuine, not curious for curiosity's sake, but searching. I told her the truth, that we managed because we learned when to speak and when to remain silent, when to stand firm and when to bend. She nodded thoughtfully. I could see her measuring her own life against those words. Comparison, when done honestly, can be instructive rather than destructive. She did not try to defend herself or explain away her past behavior. She simply listened. Listening is often the first real apology. There was a moment, months later, that confirmed to me how deeply things had shifted. She arrived alone one afternoon carrying a small plant. Not expensive, not decorative, just alive. She handed it to me and said she thought it would suit the window where the light fell gently in the mornings. She asked if it was all right to place it there. I smiled and told her she could. Permission, once ignored, now requested. Growth does not announce itself loudly. It arrives quietly, hoping not to be chased away. As the plant settled into its place, I realized something else. Respect is contagious. Once practiced, it spreads. My son seemed calmer too, less guarded, less defensive. Their conversations held less tension. They did not avoid disagreement, but they navigated it with care. Care is not fear. Care is consideration. I thought often about that first morning, the suitcases, the assumption, the calm question that had shifted everything. How easily that moment could have turned into shouting, accusations, permanent damage. But dignity has a way of slowing chaos. By refusing to match her urgency with my own, I had changed the rhythm of the encounter. Urgency feeds conflict. Calm starves it. People often believe authority must be loud to be effective. They confuse volume with strength. But true authority is quiet. It does not rush. It does not explain itself excessively. It stands, and in standing, invites others to adjust. That was the lesson the house had held for me all those years, waiting patiently until I was ready to understand it fully. There were still moments of tension, of course. Growth is not linear. There were days when old habits resurfaced, when impatience flickered briefly in her tone, when my son retreated into silence. But now those moments were addressed rather than ignored. Silence was no longer used as a weapon or a shield. It became a pause, a space to breathe before speaking again. One evening, as we shared a quiet meal, she spoke words I had not expected. She said she had mistaken kindness for weakness. She said she thought respect had to be demanded rather than earned. She did not say these things dramatically. She said them as observations, discoveries made late but sincerely. I nodded, not because I needed acknowledgement, but because recognition had arrived where it mattered. I told her something I had learned long ago, but had only recently practiced fully, that respect giving freely is kindness, respect demanded is control, respect earned is connection. She absorbed the words silently. Some lessons are not meant to be answered immediately. As years continue, I know this story will fade into memory, retold perhaps in fragments, softened by time. But the house will remember it clearly. It will remember the morning when suitcases arrived without permission and the quiet question that followed. It will remember how tension entered and how humility slowly restored balance. Houses do not forget these things. They store them in the walls, in the air, in the way doors open more easily afterward. I sometimes think about how many conflicts in families begin not with cruelty but with assumption. The assumption that love excuses disregard, the assumption that familiarity removes the need for courtesy, the assumption that time alone builds entitlement. These assumptions erode respect quietly, until one day a door must be closed briefly to remind everyone how to knock again. As I grow older, my voice grows softer, but my boundaries grow clearer. That clarity has brought me more peace than silence ever did. I no longer fear being misunderstood. Misunderstanding passes. Self-betrayal lingers. On a quiet morning much later, I stood by the window once more, watching the street wake up. Children walked past laughing, neighbors greeted one another, life unfolded as it always does. The house felt settled, secure in the knowledge that it was understood. I placed my tea down and smiled, not with triumph, but with contentment. The house had remembered who respected it, and in doing so, it had taught all of us how to respect ourselves.